All right, sixth grade friends. So today we are talking about fossil fuels in your science. So fossil fuels are called fossil fuels because they're literally energy that we get from plants and animals that died millions of years ago. And these fossil fuels we use every single day. They help us fuel like cars and buses and all of those things that you use to usually get to school, not nowadays. Some of the clothes you wear are made using things that we get from fossil fuels. A lot of the plastics that are found in computers, cell phones, things like that come from fossil fuel energy. So it's a very commonly used resource. So like for example, gasoline that we use to fuel all of our vehicles comes from petroleum, and petroleum is literally produced from plants and animals that died millions of years ago. Petroleum, coal, things like that all come from the remains of living things that got buried underground. And so that's why they're called fossil fuels, because they're like fossils. So without fossil fuels, pretty much everything would stop. And the irony to that is that we're almost, in a way, we're seeing an example of that nowadays with all these stay-at-home orders. We're using a lot less fossil fuels. And so in a way, we're kind of seeing a very miniature version of what could happen if we stopped using fossil fuels completely. So two main things to remember: fossil fuels literally supplies almost all of the energy that we need in our country, and fossil fuels come from the remains of living things that existed millions of years ago. So those are two key points to remember. So the fossil fuels get created because living things long time ago died, right? Step one, died. Then those remains get buried, whether they just naturally end up kind of turning into soil that has things get put on top of it, or whether wind causes things to blow on top of it, or whether somebody actually did bury it. Those remains get buried, and as soil, sand, dirt, things like that are piled on top, that pressure and the heat that's near the core start affecting those fossils, and that causes those remains to change, and they become coal and oil and natural gas. Some benefits that we get from fossil fuels: they give us all the energy resources we need. That's awesome. They give us a lot of electricity, but the cost is it causes so much pollution. And that impacts the Earth's atmosphere, and causes some of the issues that we're having with our ozone layer. So it's a high cost for what we get from it. So um, so thinking on resources, we end up with two major categories, and that's renewable and non-renewable. So there are natural resources that are found all over our planet. We have food is a natural resource, soil is a natural resource, water is a natural resource, wood is a natural resource, gravel is a natural resource. Things that we find in nature, those are natural resources. So we use natural resources to produce electricity, but this can be done in different ways. Sun is being used in solar panels to produce electricity. Wind is being used in turbines to produce electricity. And then we have our fossil fuels that are being used to produce electricity. The nice part about sun and wind is that the supply never runs out. I mean, we have sun all the time. I mean, yes, there are cloudy days, but we always know the sun's going to be there. The wind is going to be there. Maybe it's not as windy some days or as others, but it's going to be there. So those things, those would be called renewable resources because they're always there. Another example would be crops. Crops are considered a renewable resource because after you grow it and sell all that you have, you can regrow it again. And so the fact that you can easily replace it for another planting season makes it labeled and considered as a renewable resource. But other things are non-renewable. You use them once and it's done, or more commonly, the amount of time it takes to make the resource is so great that we'll eventually use up the whole resource before more of it can be made. So like rocks, minerals, coals, oil, all of that stuff took thousands, millions of years to make. And so if we continually use it at the speed that we use it at, we will eventually run out of the supply because the earth will not have had enough time to create more of that. And so those are considered non-renewable resources. Fossil fuels are a non-renewable resource. Those fossils take millions and millions of years to make, and we are using them all the time. And so eventually it will run out because it's a non-renewable resource. So that's why it's so important that we think about how much gasoline we're using, that we think about how much electricity we're using, that we think about how much plastic use we use, because all of that comes from non-renewable resources. And for those of us that super care about the planet, it also causes a lot of pollution. So the less you use, the less we hurt the planet. So the frustrating piece is that these fossil fuels, part of why we like them is they're so efficient. So literally we can use a small amount of it to get a lot of energy compared to some of the other things that we've found. So that's why people feel so inclined to keep using it. But in reality, the cost, it doesn't work out. So that's why when people are looking for replacements, they're really looking for things that are going to be as efficient, that are going to get us as much energy, and that hopefully will be renewable, so that we don't have to spend the next however many years trying to figure out what plan we have when this runs out, because we know someday it will. But in order to conserve fossil fuels, there are lots of things that we can do. We can stop using products that are made from plastic, like I just talked about. For example, using like canvas grocery bags. So grocery bags that you bring into the store yourself and that you fill and that you use every time instead of plastic bags is a great option to reduce plastic. Turning off lights when you're not using them at home helps save fossil fuels. Walking and biking instead of driving, that helps reduce our use of fossil fuels. And ideally, solar power and wind power will help replace those. Again, it's just that it's not as efficient, it's not as strong, and so that's been a frustration in finding those replacements. But we ideally hope that they'll still work. So those opportunities when life gets back to normal that you'll want to think about is like carpooling. If you and a friend are both going to the park and you live pretty close together, then take one car instead of both meeting there. If you're working on something in your bedroom, then the bathroom light doesn't need to be on, so turn the light off. If you are using something with plastics, like drinking a soda bottle out of a plastic soda bottle, recycle it. Like, that's a huge way to help with some of the problems that we're dealing with. So even though fossil fuels have a lot of negative impacts, they are very important to our society. We've used them throughout history to help create and develop things. Scientists and engineers use them constantly to develop steam engines and many inventions that got created in the late 1800s when the Industrial Revolution was happening. So it's a day-to-day thing that we're trying to solve at this point. The biggest drawback is the pollution. It's concerning how much we pollute our earth, and it's something that has to get better. The craziest thing about this coronavirus is that if you look at the evidence, at the pollution charts, since we've all had to stay home, the pollution has gotten reduced so drastically. And I am personally hoping that this means that people are building new habits and that we can, when we're all free of this, we don't just skyrocket back to the same pollution we had. So key things to remember. Non-renewable resources are the ones that eventually are going to run out. So coal, oil, fossil fuels, those kind of things. They cannot be made quickly again. Renewable resources are like solar energy and wind energy. They're going to constantly be there. They're never going to run out. Fossil fuels are non-renewable resources that get burned to create energy. Those fossil fuels are formed from underground remains of living things, and it takes about 350 million years for fossil fuels to form. And why is it important to conserve fossil fuels? Because it will help it last longer so we don't run out, and also because it helps our planet. It helps reduce pollution. And then some positives and negatives of fossil fuel use. They're good because they produce a lot of energy. They're bad because they won't last forever and they produce a ton of air pollution. If they're spilled, they can easily pollute the land and water and kill tons of animals and plants. So those are some kind of key points to remember as you get ready to answer your science questions. I hope this helped.